May I say something? The high voice interrupted the orchestra. André Rieu turned slowly toward the girl in the light blue dress with a folded white cane between her fingers. The microphone drifted toward her. I see nothing, but I hear everything. The crowd held its breath. Everyone says I'm pitiful, but I don't feel pitiful. I feel music. I see it with my heart. Silence. Not even a single phone was raised. André Rieu lowered his violin. The girl took a deep breath, and what she would say next would change everything about what that concert meant. 3 hours earlier, Boston's Symphony Hall was still empty. The chairs stood in perfect rows. The lighting was being tested, and the sound check was on its final round. Sophie stood at the edge of the hall, her hand firmly in that of her grandmother Eleanor. The noise of the preparations came at her from all directions, but she smiled broadly. "Grandma, it sounds like a house waking up," she said. Eleanor looked down at her granddaughter. "What do you mean, sweetheart? The chairs creak like a floor in the morning, and those machines make a humming sound like a kettle." Behind them stood Kate and David, Sophie's parents, in silence. Kate's face was tense. She had protested against this outing since Eleanor had proposed it. Too many people, too much noise, too much risk that Sophie would feel overwhelmed. "We should have stayed home," Kate whispered to David. David looked at his daughter, who was making soft movements with her free hand, as if plucking sounds from the air. "She's happy," was all he said. "Now, yes, but later when it's full." David gave no answer. He knew his wife was right to be concerned, but he had seen Sophie's face when Eleanor told her about the concert. For the first time in weeks, she had beamed with laughter. Sophie let go of Eleanor's hand and turned toward her parents. "Mom, Dad, may I go closer to the stage?" "No," Kate said immediately. "Too dangerous. I just want to feel how it sounds from there." "Sophie." But before Kate could protest further, Sophie was already walking forward, not with her cane, but simply walking as if she knew exactly where she was going. David wanted to go after her, but Eleanor held him back. "Let her," the older woman said. "She knows her limits better than we think." Sophie walked to the middle of the hall and stopped. She turned her head slowly from left to right, as if looking for something. Then she clapped her hands once hard. She listened to the echo, clapped again, listened again. A man from the technical team looked at the child in surprise. "What is she doing?" Eleanor smiled. "She's measuring space with sound." The man frowned but said nothing. He continued with his work. Sophie came back to her family. "The hall is big enough for 3,000 people. Maybe more if they stand close together." Kate's mouth fell open. "How do you know that?" "The echo, it came back in 3 seconds and I heard how it spread." David looked at his daughter with something that seemed like admiration mixed with sadness. He hadn't touched his violin in 4 years, not since the diagnosis. He had thought that music would hurt Sophie, remind her of what she had lost. But now he saw that music might be the one thing she would never lose. "Dad, why don't you play anymore?" Sophie asked suddenly. The question came out of nowhere. David froze. Kate looked away. I stopped, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because," he searched for words a 7-year-old would understand. "Because it became difficult." Sophie nodded slowly, but something in her face said she didn't believe the answer. She turned back toward the stage. "May I ask Mr. Rieu'S something if I see him?" Eleanor laughed. "You won't see him, sweetheart. He's very busy. But if you could, what would you ask him?" Sophie thought for a moment. "I want to ask him if he can see music too." The next 2 hours, the hall filled with thousands of people. Sophie sat between her parents, her hands folded in her lap. She listened to the conversations around her, the footsteps on the marble floor, the rustle of program booklets. To her, it was as if the hall was composing its own symphony. When the orchestra began to tune, she stiffened. Her breathing became irregular. "Sophie," Kate grabbed her hand. "Are you okay?" "It's so beautiful," whispered Sophie. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I see it, Mom. I see the colors." Kate looked helplessly at David. He shook his head, just as bewildered. "What colors, sweetheart?" "The violins are gold, the cellos are dark blue, and the horn is red like fire." Eleanor leaned forward. "Tell us more." It moves, Grandma. It goes up and down like waves, and when they play together, it becomes white. So white that it hurts my heart." People around them began to listen. A woman next to them, Rachel, wiped her eyes. She had partially lost her own eyesight 2 years ago and had since struggled to understand the world. But the words of this child touched something deep within her. Then André Rieu came onto the stage. The crowd applauded. Sophie startled at the sound and ducked down. "Too loud?" David asked, concerned. "No," said Sophie, straightening her back again. "Just unexpected." Rieux began to speak. His voice was warm and friendly. Sophie listened with her entire body, her head tilted slightly. When the first number began, a classical waltz, she closed her eyes. Not that it made a difference, but it felt natural. Halfway through the piece, she began to sway, gently, barely visible. Her fingers moved on her knees as if she were playing the piano. "She feels the rhythm," Eleanor whispered to Kate. But Kate was too tense to answer. She constantly looked around, afraid that someone would stare at her daughter, would judge, would ask why she was here. After the second number, a pause. Rieux chatted with the audience, made jokes. Sophie smiled at the right moments, but her attention was elsewhere. She turned her head to the left, to the right, as if searching for something. "What is it?" David asked. "There's someone sad," said Sophie. "What do you mean?" "I hear it. Someone is crying." David looked around but saw no one crying. "Maybe you're mistaken, honey." "No," Sophie said firmly. "I'm not mistaken. It's that lady there." She pointed in the general direction of Rachel. Eleanor looked and indeed saw that the older woman next to them had tears in her eyes. "You're right, Sophie. Why is she crying? Maybe the music touches her." Sophie shook her head. "No, she's crying because she misses something." Before Eleanor could ask what she meant, the next piece began. But Sophie couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about Rachel, about the grief she heard in the woman's breathing. Then, during a pause between numbers, Sophie did something unexpected. She stood up. "Sophie," Kate hissed. "Sit down." But Sophie was already walking along the rows. People had to pull in their legs to let her pass. David wanted to stand up to follow her, but Eleanor held him back again. "Trust her," she said. Sophie reached Rachel and stopped. "Ma'am, why are you sad?" Rachel looked surprised at the blind girl standing before her. How do you know I'm sad?" "I hear it. Your breathing is different." Rachel wiped away her tears. "It's nothing, sweetheart." "It's not nothing. Would you like to talk about it?" The directness of the child completely disarmed Rachel. I can't see well anymore, and music used to be everything to me, but now that I can't see the musicians play, it feels like I'm missing half." Sophie nodded slowly. "But you can still hear them, can't you?" "Yes, but that's not enough. Listen to me, close your eyes." Rachel hesitated but did as the girl asked. The next number began. "What do you see?" asked Sophie. "Nothing. It's dark." "No," Sophie said softly. "Look better. What do you feel?" Rachel concentrated. Slowly she began to smile. I feel movement, as if the music is waves." "Exactly," said Sophie. "And what color are those waves?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. Just tell me what you feel." "Gold," Rachel whispered. "I see gold." Sophie smiled broadly. "You see? You can see it in your own way." Rachel opened her eyes. Tears now flowed more freely. She wanted to say something, but Sophie was already walking back to her seat. People in the audience had seen the scene. Some clapped softly. When Sophie returned to her parents, Kate's face was red. "Sophie, you can't do that. You can't just—" "I had to help her, Mom." "Let her, Kate," David said softly. His voice broke a little. "She's doing what I never could. She's giving music back to people." The concert continued. Sophie listened with the same intense concentration, but something had changed in her posture. She sat straighter, more determined. After 3 more numbers, she whispered to Eleanor, "Grandma, I want to say something." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "To everyone here. I want to tell them how I see music." Eleanor's breath caught. "Sophie, that's not possible. This is Mr. Rieu'S concert. But maybe he would want to hear it too." "Sweetheart, there are thousands of people here." "I know. That's exactly why I want to say it." Kate had overheard the conversation. "Absolutely not, Sophie. We're here to listen, not to—" "Mom, people need to know that music isn't just for your eyes. It's for your heart." David looked at his daughter, saw the determination in her face, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt something awaken within himself. Something he thought he had lost forever. "Let her," he said suddenly. Kate turned to him, shocked. "What?" "Let her speak if there's a chance." "David, are you crazy? She's 7 years old and she understands music better than I ever have." The argument drew attention. A woman in an orange vest, Melissa, one of the event volunteers, came over to them. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor seized the opportunity. "My granddaughter would like to say something to Mr. Rieux." Melissa looked at Sophie in surprise, saw the white cane beside her chair. "Is she blind?" "Yes, since she was 3. Melissa hesitated. "It's the middle of a concert. I don't know if—" "Please," Sophie said, turning her face toward Melissa. Her eyes, though they couldn't see, were clear and sincere. I just want to share how beautiful music can be, even when you can't see it. There was something in the child's voice that touched Melissa. She looked at the stage, then back at Sophie. I can ask, but I promise nothing. Thank you, Sophie said simply. Melissa walked away. Kate was furious. This is ridiculous. We should never have come. But Sophie no longer heard her mother. She was listening to the orchestra playing a slow, melancholic melody, and in her heart, she knew this was the moment she had come for. Melissa reached the side of the stage. She waited until there was a pause between numbers. André Rieu put down his violin and picked up a microphone to talk with the audience. It was then that Melissa stepped forward and gently tugged at his sleeve. Rieu turned, slightly irritated by the interruption. Yes? Mr. Rieu, there's a girl in the audience who would like to say something. A girl? Rieu frowned. We don't have time for... She's blind, sir, and she wants to tell how she listens to music. Rieu's expression changed. He looked at the audience, then back at Melissa. How old? 7. A silence fell. Rieu looked at his orchestra, which was waiting for the signal for the next number. He looked at the thousands of people sitting patiently. Then he looked back at Melissa. Where is she sitting? 3rd row. Middle. Rieu nodded slowly. Bring her forward, but first we'll play one more number. Melissa hurried back to Sophie. He wants to hear you, but after the next number. Sophie's face lit up. Kate's face turned deathly pale. This is madness, she whispered to David. But David shook his head. Maybe this is exactly what she needs. What we all need. The orchestra began to play. Sophie recognized the melody immediately. Edelweiss. She had heard it often at home when her father still played. She remembered how he cried when he played it for the last time, the day after the doctors had confirmed the diagnosis. Sophie reached for her father's hand. Dad, you know this piece. David nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sweetheart. Why don't you play it anymore? He stopped, looked at his daughter, saw her confidence, her strength, her incredible courage, and suddenly his excuses felt meaningless. Because I was afraid. Of what? That it would hurt you. Sophie shook her head. Music never hurts, Dad. Only the lack of it hurts. David's tears now flowed freely. He pulled Sophie toward him and hugged her tightly. Kate looked on, her own resistance slowly melting. When the number ended, Melissa stood up. Sophie, are you ready? Sophie stood up. She picked up her folded white cane but then put it down again. I don't need it, you can lead me. Melissa took Sophie's hand, and together they walked forward. The audience noticed immediately. Whispers spread like a wave through the crowd. People pointed at the small girl in the light blue dress walking toward the stage. Rieu stood center stage, his violin loosely in his hand. He watched as Sophie approached. When she reached the stage, he knelt down so that he was at eye level with her. Hello, he said softly. What's your name? Sophie. Beautiful name. Melissa says you want to tell us something. Yes, sir. You know that a lot of people will be listening to you? Yes, sir, I know that. Rieu smiled. There was something in the calmness of this child that disarmed him. Are you nervous? A little, but not because there are people. Only because I'm afraid they won't understand me. I think they will understand you. He stood up and led Sophie to the center of the stage. A microphone was lowered to her height. The audience was completely silent. Sophie stood for a moment. She felt the warmth of the spotlights on her face, heard the breathing of thousands of people, felt the tension in the air. May I say something? She asked, her voice clear through the speakers. The hall didn't explode in cheers. It was as if everyone instinctively felt that this moment was different, special. I see nothing, Sophie began, but I hear everything. The words hung in the air. No one moved. Everyone says I'm pitiful, but I don't feel pitiful. I feel music. I see it with my heart. Rieu behind her felt something tighten in his chest. He had given thousands of concerts, had moved millions of people with his music, but this was different. This was a child teaching him. When I was little, continued Sophie, I asked my mother what red was. She said it was the color of apples, but I had never seen an apple. So I asked my father. He said red was warm, like fire, but I had never been burned, so I still didn't know what red was. The audience hung on her every word. Rachel, the woman Sophie had comforted earlier, was openly crying. Others wiped their eyes. But then I heard music, and I understood. Red is that note that goes so high that your heart hurts. Yellow is the sound of someone laughing in a song. Blue is the cello that sounds deep and calm like water. Sophie paused, took a deep breath. People think I miss things, but I don't. I just see differently. And tonight when I heard Mr. Rieu play, I saw stars. I saw them dancing in the air, I saw them fall and rise again, and I understood that beauty isn't just in your eyes, it's in your heart. The silence was total. Even the sounds of the city seemed to have stopped. Rieux looked at his orchestra. Some musicians had tears in their eyes. Others stared at the child in amazement. "That's why I wanted to say this," continued Sophie. "For all the people who think they're missing something, for everyone who thinks they aren't complete. You are complete. You just need to learn to see with your heart instead of your eyes." She turned toward Rieux. "Thank you, Mr. Rieux, for your music. It has shown me that I'm not alone, that there are others who also see without eyes." Rieux could no longer control himself. He knelt down again and embraced Sophie. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this." Sophie hugged him back. "I think you always knew. You just needed someone to remind you." When Rieux stood up, he looked at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have played all over the world. I have played for kings and queens, for presidents and prime ministers, but I've never met anyone who understands music like this girl." He turned to his orchestra. "We're going to play something special for Sophie." He gave the orchestra a signal. They began a soft, slow melody. Sophie didn't recognize it at first, but she felt its beauty. It was a composition by Rieux himself, one he had written years ago but rarely played. Rieux began to play. His violin sang with a tenderness he rarely showed. And as he played, he looked at Sophie, saw how she moved to the music, how her face glowed with joy. Halfway through the piece, Rieux did something unexpected. He stopped playing and walked over to Sophie. He gave her his violin. "Feel it," he said. Sophie carefully took the violin. She felt the smooth wood, the taut strings, the weight of the instrument. Then she held it to her ear as Rieux continued playing with another violin. Sophie's eyes widened. "I feel it vibrating," she whispered. "It feels like it's alive." "It is," said Rieux. "Music is life. It breathes, it feels, it grows." Sophie smiled broadly. She returned the violin, but something in her had changed. She felt connected to something greater than herself. When the piece ended, the audience finally erupted in applause. But it wasn't ordinary applause. It was a standing ovation. Thousands of people stood up and clapped, not just for Rieux, but for Sophie, for her courage, for her wisdom, for her ability to remind them of what was truly important. Sophie was escorted back to her seat by Melissa. Kate embraced her daughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice broken with emotion. David couldn't speak. He could only hold his daughter, his tears flowing freely. Eleanor smiled through her own tears. "You did it, sweetheart. You showed them all." But it wasn't over yet. Rieux picked up the microphone again. "Sophie," he called, "would you do something else for me?" Sophie turned her face toward the stage. "What, Mr. Rieux?" "Stay right there. I want you to listen to what comes now, and afterward, tell me what you see." He gave the orchestra a new signal. They began to play, a piece that Sophie didn't know. It was complex, layered, full of emotion. Sophie closed her eyes and listened. As the music grew, she began to speak, not loudly, but loud enough that Melissa heard and passed it on to the technician. Her words were amplified through the speakers. "I see a forest," said Sophie, "with tall trees moving in the wind. The sunlight falls through the leaves. It's green and gold. Now it's changing. It's getting darker. Rain is coming. I hear the drops falling on the leaves. They sound like little bells. Now the sun is coming back out. The rain stops. A rainbow appears. I see all the colors at once. It's so beautiful that it hurts." The orchestra continued playing, guided by Sophie's words. Rieux watched in amazement. This child was improvising a story to their music, and it was perfect. "Now I see people," continued Sophie. "They're dancing, they're laughing, they're loving each other. Some are sad, but the music comforts them. It lifts them up. It shows them that everything will be all right." The piece ended. Sophie opened her eyes. "That's what I saw, Mr. Rieux." Rieux stood frozen. He had composed that piece after losing his mother years ago. It described her life, the joy, the sorrow, the eventual peace. And this child had understood it without ever having heard it or knowing the background. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's exactly what it means." The concert continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone in the audience seemed to listen more deeply, to feel more. Sophie's words had unlocked something in them, a way of listening they had forgotten. Rachel, the older woman, couldn't take her eyes off Sophie. After a few numbers, she could hold back no longer. She stood up and walked to Sophie's row. Kate looked up warily as the stranger approached. "May I speak with her for a moment?" Rachel asked softly. Eleanor looked at Sophie, who nodded. Of course. Rachel knelt beside Sophie's chair. Sweetheart, thank you for what you just said about seeing with your heart. You're welcome, Mom. I wanted to tell you that you've given me something I thought I had lost. Hope. Sophie turned her face toward Rachel. You weren't hopeless, were you? Yes, I was. Since I began losing my eyesight, I felt useless. I couldn't read anymore, couldn't paint, couldn't see my grandchildren's faces. But you can feel them, can't you? Rachel smiled through her tears. Yes, I can. But I had forgotten that was enough. Sophie reached for Rachel's hand. It's more than enough because feeling goes deeper than seeing. When you touch someone's face, you don't just feel their skin, you feel their heart. Rachel burst into tears and hugged Sophie tightly. Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you so much. Other people in the audience had seen the moment. Some began to come forward. A middle-aged man knelt beside Sophie. I went deaf in one ear 10 years ago, he said. I thought I could never enjoy music again. But what you said helped me understand that I can experience it differently. A young woman with a scar on her cheek also came forward. People stare at me because of this scar, but you've made me see that beauty isn't about how you look. One by one, people came to Sophie to thank her. Kate was overwhelmed. She had always seen Sophie's blindness as something to protect, something to hide. But now she saw that her daughter's difference was her gift, not her limitation. David stood up and walked a short distance away. He could no longer watch without feeling something break within himself. All those years, he had thought he had given up his violin to protect Sophie, but now he understood he had done it to protect himself, because he couldn't bear the pain of seeing his daughter in a world that didn't seem made for her. Eleanor followed him. David, are you okay? He shook his head. I've deprived myself of music for so many years. And why? Out of fear. Out of shame. You didn't have to. No, I didn't. But I did it anyway. And now I see my daughter, who can't see anything, but understands everything. She has more courage in her little finger than I have in my entire body. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. It's not too late, David. You can always begin again. Can I? Look at her. Eleanor pointed to Sophie, who was still surrounded by people. She begins anew every day without being able to see where she's going. If she can do it, you can too. David looked at his daughter, saw her smile, her calmness, her strength, and he felt something shift within him. Meanwhile, Rieu had walked to the edge of the stage. He looked at the scene below. Sophie, surrounded by admirers, people sharing their stories, tears and smiles mingled. He had always seen music as his gift to the world, but now he understood that sometimes the world gives back in the form of a 7-year-old girl who taught him what music truly meant. He gestured to Melissa. Bring Sophie up again. Melissa worked her way through the crowd and reached for Sophie. Sophie, Mr. Rieu wants you on stage again. Sophie stood up and followed Melissa. When she reached the stage, Rieu was waiting for her with something in his hands. It was a small golden object, an old musical note on a chain. Sophie, he said, I received this 20 years ago from a teacher who taught me to love music. He said I should pass it on to someone who truly understood music. I think you're that person. He hung the necklace around Sophie's neck. She touched the note, felt the cool metal, the smooth shape. It's beautiful, she whispered. Not as beautiful as what you've given us. Sophie smiled. Mr. Rieu, may I ask you something? Of course. Why do you play music? Rieu thought for a moment. Because I believe music can connect people. It transcends language, culture, differences. I think so too. But I also think music reminds us of who we are when we've forgotten. Rieu looked at the child in surprise. You're wiser than most adults I know. I'm not wise. I just listen. Maybe that's the same thing. The concert was nearing its end. Rieu announced the final number, a medley of famous waltzes. But before he began, he turned to Sophie. Would you like to stay here on stage? Sophie hesitated. But then people will be looking at me instead of you. I think that's exactly what they need. Sophie stayed. She sat on a small chair at the side of the stage, and as the orchestra played, she listened with her entire being. Occasionally she moved her hands as if conducting. Other times she just smiled. The audience looked at her as much as at Rieu. They saw in her what they had forgotten in themselves, the ability to be fully present, to feel without judgment, to love without boundaries. When the number ended, Sophie stood up. She walked to Rieu and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and gave her the microphone. I want to thank everyone, said Sophie, for listening, not just to the music, but to me. Sometimes people think that because I'm blind, I'm less. But tonight, I felt more than ever because you saw me. Not with your eyes, but with your heart. And that's the most beautiful gift anyone can give me." She returned the microphone and bowed, just as she had seen Rieux do. The audience exploded in applause. People stood up, shouted, cried. It was no longer a concert. It was a celebration of humanity, of connection, of love. After the concert, the audience slowly dispersed, but many lingered. They wanted to see Sophie one more time, thank her, hear her story. Kate tried to protect her daughter from the crowd, but Sophie wanted to stay. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "I want to talk to them." Over the next hour, Sophie spoke with dozens of people. Parents of disabled children came to her for advice. People who were themselves struggling with loss came for comfort. Musicians came to ask how she could feel music so deeply. A young man, a beginner violinist, knelt beside her. "Sophie, I've been playing the violin for 10 years, but I never feel good enough." "How do you do that? How do you feel so sure about music?" Sophie thought for a moment. "I think it's not about being good enough. It's about being real. When you play with your whole heart, it's always good enough. But what if people don't like it? Then they don't like it. But that doesn't make your music any less real." The young man nodded slowly. "Thank you. That really helps." Meanwhile, David had walked to the side of the stage, where some musicians from the orchestra were packing up their instruments. He looked at the violins in their cases, felt a longing he had suppressed for years. An older musician noticed him. "Do you play?" David shook his head. "Not anymore. Not for years." "Why not?" "It's complicated." The musician smiled. "Music is never complicated. We make it complicated." He picked up a violin and offered it to David. "Just try it for a moment." David hesitated. His hands trembled as he took the instrument. He placed it under his chin, felt the familiar weight, the familiar shape. Then he picked up the bow. He began to play, first hesitantly, the notes uncertain, but then he found his rhythm. The music flowed from him as if he had never stopped. It was Edelweiss, the piece he had last played before he stopped. Sophie heard it even through all the conversations, recognized her father's touch. She stopped mid-sentence and turned her head. "Dad," she whispered. Eleanor heard it too. She took Sophie's hand. "He's playing again, sweetheart." "I know, and it sounds like he's coming home." Kate walked over to David. She saw the tears on his cheeks as he played. She hadn't seen him so happy since before Sophie's diagnosis. When the piece ended, she embraced him. "Why did you wait so long?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that I would hurt her. Afraid that I wasn't good enough. Afraid of everything." "And now? Now I realize that fear has cost me more than blindness ever cost Sophie. She's never missed anything. I've missed everything." Andre Rieu had come off the stage and had heard David play. He walked over to him. "You're good," Rieux said simply. David looked up in surprise. "Mr. Rieu, I don't play professionally." "No, I stopped years ago." "Why?" David looked at Sophie, who was now walking toward him. "Because of her. I thought music would hurt her." Rieux looked at Sophie. "I think your daughter has proven the opposite." Sophie reached them. "Dad, you played. It was so beautiful." David knelt and hugged his daughter. "You gave me that, sweetheart. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." "Why was that?" "Because music made me happy. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Are you happy now?" David looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the violin in his hands. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm happy again." Rieux looked on, feeling moved. "Sophie," he said, "you haven't just taught the audience something tonight. You've taught all of us, including me." "What have I taught you, Mr. Rieux?" "That music isn't about perfection. It's about connection, about touching hearts. And you've touched more hearts than any concert I've ever given." Sophie smiled. "That wasn't just me. That was the music. I was just the channel. Maybe. But what a beautiful channel." It was getting late. Most people had left. Only Sophie's family, Rieux, a few musicians and Rachel remained. They sat together in the now empty hall, the evening air cool and clear. Rachel sat next to Sophie. "Sweetheart, may I ask you something?" "Of course, Ma'am." "Are you ever afraid? Afraid of the darkness?" Sophie thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember that everyone lives in darkness. Not just me. Everyone has things they can't see. The future, what others think, what lies beyond the horizon. I just have a different kind of darkness. That's a beautiful way to look at it. Besides," continued Sophie, "in the dark, stars shine brighter. Maybe I'm in the dark so that I can see the stars better." Rachel hugged Sophie again. "You're a special girl, you know that? People say that a lot, but I don't feel special. I just feel like myself." Maybe that's exactly what makes you special. Rieu'S stood up and stretched. It's time we all go. But Sophie, before we leave, I want to give you something. He pulled a card from his pocket. This is my card. If you ever want to talk, or if you want to be at a concert, call me. You're always welcome. Sophie took the card. Thank you, Mr. Rieu'S. No, thank you for everything. The family prepared to leave. Eleanor helped Sophie with her coat. David carried the violin that the musician had lent him, with the promise to return it tomorrow. As they walked across the hall, Sophie turned around once more. Mr. Rieu'S. Yes, Sophie. Will you keep making music even when it gets difficult? Rieu'S smiled. Yes, sweetheart. Thanks to you, I understand again why I do it. Good, because the world needs your music, and the world needs your voice. They waved to each other, and Sophie's family left. As they walked through the streets of Boston, Sophie hummed softly to herself. It wasn't a melody anyone else knew. It was her own song, born from the evening she had just experienced. Kate looked at her daughter and realized that all her life she had been afraid of the wrong things. She had been afraid that Sophie wouldn't fit into the world. But tonight, she had seen that it wasn't Sophie who needed to fit in. It was the world that needed to learn from her. The weeks that followed were transformative for the entire family. David picked up his violin again, not just as a hobby, but as a passion. He began teaching children, including children with various disabilities. He wanted to teach them what Sophie had taught him, that music is for everyone, regardless of their limitations. Kate, who had always been so protective, slowly learned to let go. She saw that Sophie's strength came not from protection, but from freedom. She began giving Sophie more independence, more space to explore, more trust in her own ability to navigate the world. Sophie herself didn't change much. She was still the same calm, wise girl, but she had gained a new confidence. She now knew that her voice was important, that her perspective had value, that her way of seeing was just as valid as anyone else's. A month after the concert, Rieu'S called. He invited the family to a special event, a benefit for children with visual impairments, and he wanted Sophie to speak. I know I'm asking a lot, he said on the phone to Eleanor, but what she said that night touched so many people. I think her story can help even more people. Eleanor consulted with the family. Kate was uncertain, but David supported it, and Sophie herself wanted to do it. I want to help people understand, she said simply, just like Mr. Rieu'S helped me understand that my voice is important. So a month later they stood in another large hall, this time filled with families of children with various disabilities. The audience was different from the last time, focused, intense, desperately seeking hope. Sophie stepped forward. This time she wasn't nervous. She knew what she wanted to say. Hello everyone, she began. My name is Sophie and I'm blind, but that's not the first thing I want you to know about me. She paused, letting the words sink in. The first thing I want you to know is that I see music, that I feel colors, that I experience the world in a way that is different, but not less. When I was little, people thought I was poor. They looked at me with pity. They whispered behind my back. They treated me as if I were fragile, but I'm not fragile, I'm strong. Not despite my blindness, but sometimes because of it, because I've learned to rely on things other people forget. Sound, touch, intuition. I've learned to listen with my whole body, not just my ears. There was absolute silence in the hall. Parents held their children close. Some were already crying. I know that many of you here are afraid, continued Sophie. Afraid for your children's future. Afraid they won't be happy. Afraid the world will be too harsh for them. But I want to tell you, don't be afraid. Your children are stronger than you think. They see things you can't see. They understand things you might never understand. And if you give them space, they will surprise you. She turned toward where she knew Rieu'S was standing. Mr. Rieu'S taught me something. He showed me that being different isn't bad. That being different can be your gift. That what others see as a limitation can be your superpower. So to all the children here who feel different, you are not alone. There are many like you, and you are beautiful, exactly as you are. And to all the parents, trust your children. Give them room to grow, to fail, to learn. Don't protect them so much that they forget how strong they are. She smiled. Because we are strong, we are brave, and we deserve the same chances as everyone. The applause that followed was thunderous. But more important than the applause were the conversations that followed. Parents came to Sophie's parents with questions, with concerns, with hope. Children came to Sophie to share. A 10-year-old boy who was partially deaf told Sophie about his struggle at school. No one understands how hard it is, he said. I understand. replied Sophie. Not exactly the same, but I understand the feeling of being different. How do you deal with that? I try to remember that different isn't bad. It's just different, and sometimes different is exactly what the world needs. The boy nodded, his eyes bright. Thank you. An 8-year-old girl in a wheelchair asked Sophie how she was so confident. I always feel so different, she said. You are different, said Sophie. But that's okay, because if we were all the same, who would learn new things? Who would teach us to look at the world in a different way? Do you really think I can teach things to others? I'm sure of it. You see the world from a perspective not many people have. That makes you special. Throughout the next hours, Sophie spoke with dozens of children and their families. She listened to their stories, shared her own experiences, offered comfort and hope. Rachel had also come to the event. She had heard Sophie's speech and was deeply moved. When she finally got the chance to speak with Sophie, she hugged her tightly. Sweetheart, you've changed my life, said Rachel. After that evening at the concert, I started helping other blind and visually impaired people. I now give workshops on how to adapt to vision loss. That's wonderful, Mrs. Rachel, said Sophie, and it's all thanks to you. You showed me that I'm still valuable, even with my limitation. You were always valuable, you just needed someone to remind you. Toward the end of the evening, Rieu'S came to Sophie. He had seen how she had spoken with everyone, how she had shown patience and wisdom far beyond her years. Sophie, he said, I want to propose something to you. What, Mr. Rieu'S? I want to start a program, a music program for children with various disabilities, and I want you to be involved, not as a student but as a mentor to teach other children what you've taught me. Sophie's face lit up. Really? Really? I think you have a gift for helping people understand, and I want to give you that opportunity. Sophie turned to her parents. May I? Kate looked at David. She saw the pride in his eyes, the love, the trust, and she nodded. Yes, sweetheart, you may. Sophie smiled broadly. Then I'd love to. The months that followed were filled with new adventures. Sophie became a regular guest at Rieu'S events. She spoke at schools, at community centers, at conferences. Her story spread, inspiring thousands. But more than that, she helped individual children. She corresponded with children around the world who were struggling with their own challenges. She offered advice, support, friendship. David's music career blossomed anew. He was invited to perform at various events, often alongside Rieu'S, and at each performance he thought of his daughter, of her courage, of what she had taught him. Kate found her own way to help. She started a support group for parents of children with disabilities, where she shared her own journey, her fears, her lessons. Eleanor watched all these changes with great pride. She had always known Sophie was something special. Now the world finally saw it too. A year after the first concert, Rieu'S organized a special anniversary concert. He invited Sophie to speak again, but this time with a surprise. When Sophie came onto the stage, she heard more than one violin tuning. She frowned, confused. Mr. Rieu'S, are there more musicians? Yes, Sophie, just listen. The orchestra began to play, but this time there were 20 extra violinists. All children with various disabilities, who had learned to play through David's program. Sophie's mouth fell open. Dad? Yes, sweetheart, said David, who was also on stage. This is what you started. All these children are now learning music, and they want to play for you. The children began a simple but beautiful melody. Some didn't play perfectly, others missed notes. But the emotion, the passion, the joy, that was perfect. Sophie listened, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's beautiful, she whispered. Just like you, said Rieu'S, who stood beside her. When the piece ended, Sophie took the microphone. I don't know what to say. This is more than I could ever have dreamed. She paused, gathering her thoughts. A year ago, I stood here afraid but hopeful. I wanted to show people that being different is okay, that blindness didn't make me less. But what I didn't realize was that I wouldn't just be helping myself, that my words would touch others, that my story would grow into something much bigger than myself. Today I stand here again, no longer afraid, only grateful. Grateful to Mr. Rieu'S, who gave me a voice. Grateful to my family, who gave me the space to grow. Grateful to everyone who has listened, who has believed, who has understood. But most of all, I'm grateful for all the children. You've shown me that I'm not alone, that we are stronger together, that our differences don't divide us, but unite us. She smiled broadly. So thank you all for seeing me, not with your eyes, but with your hearts. The audience rose for a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. But for Sophie, it wasn't the applause that was important. It was the connection she felt, the love that filled the hall, the realization that she had made a difference. That evening, as the family drove home, Sophie sat quietly in the car. Kate looked at her, concerned. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "Yes, Mom. More than okay." "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how it feels to be seen, not with eyes, but with hearts, and how that changes everything." David looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter. "You've changed all of us, Sophie. You've given me back my music. You've taught your mother to let go. You've fulfilled your grandmother's dream." "And what was Grandma's dream?" Eleanor turned in her seat. "That you would show the world who you truly are, a light in the darkness." Sophie smiled. "It's funny you say that, Grandma, because I've always thought that darkness isn't scary. It's just space for light to shine. And you shine brighter than anyone I know," said Eleanor. When they got home, David helped Sophie with her coat. He noticed that she was still wearing the golden musical note that Rieux had given her. "Do you always wear that?" he asked. "Yes," said Sophie. "It reminds me that music is forever, that it doesn't stop when the concert ends. It continues in our hearts." That night, as Sophie lay in bed, she thought back on everything that had happened. The concert, the people she had met, the lives that had been changed, and she realized she had spent her whole life thinking that being blind meant she would miss things. But in reality, it had helped her see more than most people would ever see, not with her eyes but with her soul. And as she fell asleep, she smiled because she knew that her journey had only just begun. There were still so many people to help, so many hearts to touch, so much light to spread. In the dark, stars shine the brightest, and Sophie was determined to shine as brightly as she could.